Somewhere in the highlands of modern Ethiopia, roughly 2 million years ago, an early human ancestor lay down for the night on bare rock. Not moss, not fur, not even a pile of leaves. Just stone, cold enough to numb skin, hard enough to bruise bone by morning. And yet the archaeological record shows this was not a desperate exception. It was the norm, repeated for hundreds of thousands of years, across a species that had every physical capability to make life easier for itself, and, for reasons that still puzzle researchers, chose not to. We assume comfort is instinct, that any creature, given the choice between soft and hard, warm and cold, easy and difficult, will always choose the gentler option. It seems like the most obvious law of survival. But the deeper you dig into the archaeology, the anthropology, and the evolutionary biology of early humans, the more that assumption falls apart. Prehistoric humans had access to soft plant material, animal hides, insulating grasses. They were intelligent enough to construct shelters, weave basic bedding, and organize complex social structures. Yet for the overwhelming majority of human history, comfort was not a priority. In many cases, it appears to have been deliberately ignored. To understand why, you first have to unlearn something. Comfort, as we experience it today, mattress technology, climate control, cushioned shoes, is not a baseline human need. It is a modern luxury built on abundant resources and stored energy. For early hominins, every material decision was a trade-off against survival, and often, comfort actively worked against the very traits that kept the species alive. Take sleep. Modern humans obsess over sleep surfaces, spending enormous sums on mattresses engineered for spinal alignment and pressure relief. But research into modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania and the San of the Kalahari, who live in ways that closely resemble ancient human lifestyles, reveals something striking. Sleep scientist Jerome Siegel, who led one of the most comprehensive studies on hunter-gatherer sleep patterns, found that these groups typically sleep on hard-packed earth or thin mats, often without any cushioning at all, and yet report almost no chronic back pain and experience deeper, more consistent sleep cycles than the average person in industrialized nations. The soft mattress, it turns out, may not be solving a problem prehistoric humans actually had. It may be solving a problem that modern sedentary lifestyles created. This single finding cracks open a much larger truth. The prehistoric body was not designed around comfort. It was designed around movement, exposure, and adaptability. A body that spends 12 hours a day walking, climbing, squatting, and carrying does not develop the same vulnerabilities as a body that spends 12 hours sitting in a chair. Hard ground did not damage the prehistoric spine the way it would damage yours, because the muscles supporting that spine were shaped by relentless physical demand, not by the expectation of rest. But sleep is only the beginning. Consider clothing and shelter. Early humans living through the last ice age, in regions where temperatures regularly dropped below freezing, had access to animal furs capable of providing serious insulation. Archaeological evidence from sites in Siberia and Eastern Europe shows early humans did use hides for warmth, but often in surprisingly minimal, functional ways, wrapped loosely around the torso rather than tailored for maximum comfort, prioritizing mobility and dexterity over warmth alone. Anthropologists studying these remains have proposed a compelling explanation. Cold exposure, in controlled amounts, actually triggers physiological benefits that would have mattered enormously to a species surviving on the edge of starvation. Exposure to cold activates brown adipose tissue, a special kind of fat that burns energy to generate heat. And researchers studying cold adaptation in modern populations have found it can improve metabolic efficiency and insulin sensitivity. In other words, staying slightly cold may have made early humans better at converting scarce food into usable energy. Comfort, in this context, would have been a liability. This idea, that the body performs better under mild, repeated stress rather than constant ease, has a name in modern physiology. Researchers call it hormesis, a biological principle where low doses of a stressor, whether cold, hunger, or physical strain, trigger adaptive responses that make an organism stronger, more resilient, and more efficient. Exercise itself works this way. Muscle only grows after being broken down by resistance. Bone density only increases under mechanical load. The prehistoric world was, in essence, an accidental hormesis machine, constantly applying just enough stress to keep the human body adapting, without ever applying so much that it broke the system entirely. Comfort, by removing that stress, would have removed the very mechanism that kept early humans alive through brutal climates and unpredictable food supplies. There is also a psychological layer to this story that is just as important as the physical one. Evolutionary psychologists have long studied what is sometimes called the hedonic treadmill, the idea that human beings adapt quickly to comfort and then simply raise their baseline expectation, chasing the next level of ease rather than settling into contentment. If this tendency existed in early humans the way it exists in us today, then comfort would have been a dangerous psychological trap rather than a reward. A species constantly seeking greater ease at the expense of vigilance, strength, and adaptability would have been catastrophically unprepared for a world filled with predators, famine, and sudden environmental shifts. Some anthropologists argue that natural selection may have actively filtered out individuals who prioritized comfort over readiness, not through any conscious choice, but simply because comfort-seeking individuals were more likely to be caught off guard, less likely to keep moving, and less likely to survive long enough to pass on their genes. This brings us to one of the most overlooked forces shaping prehistoric life: constant environmental unpredictability. Modern humans build homes because we expect our environment to stay dangerous or uncomfortable if we do not intervene. But early humans lived in environments where the danger was not a fixed condition to escape. It was a constantly shifting variable that required continuous adaptation. Comfort implies stability, a fixed, safe zone you can retreat into and stop paying attention to your surroundings. But paleoanthropologists studying early human campsites have found repeated evidence of frequent relocation, sometimes every few days or weeks, following migrating herds, seasonal water sources, or changing weather patterns. Investing heavily in comfort, building elaborate shelters, weaving soft bedding, creating padded clothing would have made little sense for a group that might abandon that location within days. Comfort requires permanence. Prehistoric life offered none. And then there is a factor that modern minds tend to underestimate entirely: the role of pain and discomfort as information. The human nervous system did not evolve to make us feel good. It evolved to keep us alive, and one of its most powerful tools for doing that is discomfort itself. A hard sleeping surface forces the body to shift positions throughout the night, a subtle, unconscious behavior that improves circulation and reduces the risk of nerve compression, something researchers studying pressure ulcers in hospital patients now understand quite well. Cold discomfort forces movement, which generates body heat and keeps the mind alert to environmental threats. Hunger discomfort drives motivation to search for food before energy reserves become critically low. Every uncomfortable sensation early humans experienced was, in effect, a survival signal. And dulling those signals with excessive comfort would have meant dulling the very system that kept the species responsive to danger. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because it forces us to ask an uncomfortable question about ourselves. If discomfort was such a powerful evolutionary tool, why did humans eventually abandon it so completely? The answer lies in one of the most significant transitions in our species' history: the agricultural revolution. Roughly 12,000 years ago, as human groups began settling into fixed locations, growing crops, and domesticating animals, the constant unpredictability that had shaped hundreds of thousands of years of human behavior suddenly began to disappear. Permanent settlements made permanent shelters worthwhile. Stored food surpluses reduced the urgency of constant movement. For the first time, comfort became a rational investment rather than a wasted one, because for the first time, humans could reasonably expect to still be in the same place, using the same bed, wearing the same style of clothing months or even years later. But here is the twist that most people never consider. This shift did not happen because human biology changed. It happened because human circumstances changed, and our biology simply had not caught up. The body that had spent nearly 2 million years adapting to cold, hard ground, physical strain, and environmental unpredictability was suddenly placed into warm houses, soft bedding, and sedentary daily life, all within what amounts to a blink of an eye on an evolutionary timescale. Some researchers studying modern chronic health conditions, from lower back pain to metabolic disorders, argue that many of these conditions are not signs that our ancestors lived badly. They are signs that we are living in a way our bodies were never designed for, an environment engineered entirely around comfort, running on hardware built entirely around stress. This reframes the entire question. Prehistoric humans did not ignore comfort because they were primitive, unaware, or incapable of creating it. They ignored it because comfort, in their world, was not actually beneficial. It offered no survival advantage in an environment defined by unpredictability, scarcity, and constant physical demand. The soft, padded, climate-controlled world we now consider a basic human right is not something our ancestors were too unsophisticated to build. It is something they had no evolutionary reason to want. And this is perhaps the most striking realization the archaeological and physiological evidence points toward. The discomfort of prehistoric life was not a hardship imposed upon early humans by a cruel world. It was, in a very real sense, the mechanism that built them, physically resilient, metabolically adaptable, psychologically alert, precisely because comfort never had the chance to soften them. Every cold night on bare ground, every meal that came only after relentless effort, every uninsulated shelter exposed to shifting weather, was quietly sculpting a body and mind built for endurance rather than ease. So return to that early human lying down on stone in the Ethiopian highlands 2 million years ago. It is tempting to see that image as a tragedy, a species too primitive to know better, enduring hardship simply because nothing better existed yet. But the science tells a very different story. That hard, cold, uncomfortable night was not an obstacle standing between our ancestors and a better life. It was the very process shaping them into a species capable of surviving ice ages, migrating across every continent on Earth, and eventually building the comfortable, insulated world their descendants now can't imagine living without. Comfort was not something prehistoric humans failed to achieve. It was something evolution had not yet decided they needed, and in that absence, it built something far more valuable instead. A body and mind engineered not to feel good, but to endure absolutely anything.